What's up YouTube? It's Dr. Zora here. I'm a student physical therapist, and what we're going to talk about today is wrist pain. So wrist pain is a common issue that gamers experience, especially those who play games that require multiple quick movements, such as first-person shooters, CSGO, Overwatch, PUBG, the list goes on, or even games that are like MOBAs, like League of Legends, Dota 2. If you're a gamer that is experiencing wrist pain after prolonged hours of gaming, this may be the video for you. Now before I go into the simple trick that you can do to help with your wrist pain while you're gaming, we need to talk about why gamers get wrist pain in the first place. If we know what's causing the wrist pain, we're better able to know how to prevent it. So if you're experiencing wrist pain while gaming, you may be what I like to call a wrist aimer. So basically what that means is when you're moving your mouse, I'm gonna bring it into frame here. So when you're moving your mouse, you tend to keep your forearm pretty stationary and rely more on moving just your hand like so. So let's take a look at why this isn't good for your wrist. So we have our wrist right here. You can find it pretty easily if you take your thumb and your next finger here. Gotta go right under where the hand kind of ends. You should find some kind of bony prominences here, or just some distinct bony spots. So there's gonna be one kind of near the pinky and another one where the thumb is. So this one here and one here. Kind of just feel around, and if you feel kind of a part that kind of sticks out, that's probably the area that we need to find. And if you go bring your thumbs and your finger right above that, that's your wrist joint right there. So let's take a look at what the wrist does. So you can bring the hand down with your wrist, we call that wrist flexion. You can bring it up with the wrist, that's wrist extension. Now what's more commonly done when you're gaming is kind of these side-to-side motions here. You don't need to know the term for it, but if you're curious, it's called, when you're going towards the thumb, radial deviation, and going towards the pinky, ulnar deviation. So this is kind of the stuff that you kind of do mostly when you're on a mouse and keyboard and aiming around, kind of moving your wrist like so, side to side. Now let's think about how many times you move your wrist side to side when you're gaming. If you're playing MOBAs like League of Legends and Dota 2, they're not going to be as sharp movements. It might be a little bit smoother when you're kind of trying to, go and get CS. But if you're playing FPS games like CSGO, PUBG, Fortnite, Overwatch, etc., you're probably moving your wrist a ton more, and if you're trying to go for those flick shots, you're probably moving really fast, putting a lot of pressure on the wrist. So I went to a video of Tfue playing Fortnite, and I chose Fortnite because when you're in build battles, you kind of go all over the place trying to build battle people. So I feel like Fortnite's one where you really use your wrist aimer. You're going to use it a lot during those kind of fights. Now it's extremely hard to get an accurate number of how many times you move the wrist. So for Tfue, I looked at just how many times he moved it in 1 minute. Again, it was pretty hard to get, but I just looked at kind of an average battle here, and in 1 minute he moved his wrist about 100 times. So I think this is a safe number to say. Again, this was an average build fight, not a high level build fight, and not just looting around normally. So this is kind of an average number that we could take, more or less. So 1 minute, 100 times moving the wrist side to side. Alright, so let's do a little bit of math here. So if we're doing 100 wrist movements per minute, and let's say we're playing a Fortnite game that averages about 15 minutes long. So in that one Fortnite game that's 15 minutes, we're doing 100 times 15. That's 1500 wrist movements in that one game of Fortnite. And let's say we're playing Fortnite for an hour, so we fit in 4 games. So we multiply 1500 times 4, and we get 6,000 times that we're moving the wrist in 1 hour of Fortnite. Now no one ever really plays for 1 hour. So let's say we're gonna go somewhere in the middle. So let's say an average gaming session is 4 hours long. Now we multiply 6,000 times 4, we get 24,000 times that we're moving our wrist in one gaming session. Now if we add that up, let's say someone games for, let's say, 5 times a week. That's going to add up to over 100,000 times that we're moving our wrist in 1 week of gaming. And so that's just kind of giving an example of how many times we do this. If you work an office job or do some other stuff that also requires the mouse and keyboard, or you're just surfing the web, that number also adds up. Alright, now the reason that I bring up these numbers is to really emphasize how much we move our wrists when we're gaming. Now if you're having wrist pain that initially starts off okay when you're starting off your gaming session, but over time it starts to get more and more painful, this is probably an overuse injury. from just moving your wrist, as I said earlier, all those times while you're gaming. Now that we have the logistics out of the way, if this sounds like your situation, your pain kind of increases over time when you're trying to game, we're going to look at the simple tricks that can try to help you out. So this simple trick is setting up your environment and utilizing the elbow and the shoulder to help move your mouse. So this is what I like to call an arm aimer. So if you take a look at your wrist, it's pretty tiny. And if you just solely rely on your wrist while aiming, you're relying on this really tiny structure and joint to just move you for you. Versus if you kind of bring the elbow, you can see how big the elbow is. And the shoulder just, I mean, compared to the wrist, it's ginormous and has so much more motion. Like if you're a wrist aimer, you're just relying on this right here. It's about like 20 degrees each direction. Versus the elbow, you have 140 degrees of motion here. Shoulder, you can go all the way up to your head. It's about almost 180 degrees of motion. So not only do these joints have a lot more movement, they help take some of the load off the wrist. So you can't fully neglect wrist movement when you're gaming. Like if you're doing like a precise, like small adjustment like this, you're probably going to use the wrist like so. You try to adjust and get the shot off. But for bigger movements, let's say we're here and we're trying to do a flick, instead of just using the wrist like this, you can get the whole arm involved. So watch my arm here, getting my whole arm involved, going for the flick like so. Getting the whole arm involved so that you have the elbow and the shoulder to help you out and you're not just solely relying on the wrist. So it's sort of like doing a compound movement at the gym. So if you're doing the bench press, you're getting your chest, your triceps, your shoulder involved, versus like just doing like tricep extensions that just get the triceps involved. This is the same idea. You're trying to turn an isolated movement into a compound movement. So you can do more. If you look at the pros, all of them that are good are arm aimers here. Versus just using the wrist, you can't do as much with it. It's smaller. You won't be able to aim as well. But the goal for this video that I'm talking about is really to offload the wrist so that you can game for longer sessions and keep the wrist nice and healthy. Now there's one more thing to add to this. So now that we know that we want to be an arm aimer, we have to set ourselves up to be an arm aimer. So if you have a really small mouse pad that's, let's say, like this big, you won't have room to really be an arm aimer. You're setting yourself up to be a wrist aimer by doing that. So you don't need a big mouse pad really. So if you look at mine here, I have like a pretty big one, like full size XXL. If you have just a normal large mouse pad that most people have, that's going to be efficient enough for most games. It's going to be, say, it's going to be probably about this size here to the end of my mouse pad. That's probably plenty of room for you to flick to the right, to the left, and so forth. So getting a larger mouse pad is going to really help you, give you that space so you can be an arm aimer. Now the second thing that I have for you guys is to put your forearm onto the table. You don't have to get the complete forearm onto it. It's kind of more of a preference thing, but if you can get at least like 75% of your forearm onto the table, that'll help so much more on getting you to use your forearm actually when you're aiming, rather than having it kind of all the way down like a lot of people have. They just kind of have their wrist onto the table, and that just kind of sets you up because the wrist can move really well right now, but the forearm, since it's off the table, no support on it, it's hard to kind of follow up with it, or it just feels awkward in general. So get your forearm up there, and that's just going to make it easier for you to use the forearm. And since it's going to be easier to use the forearm, you're going to be more likely to actually do it and become an arm aimer and aim with your arm and less with the wrist. Kind of summarize things: set up your environment first of all. Larger mouse pad, doesn't have to be super large, but just a normal large size will be sufficient so you have room to become an arm aimer. Get your elbow and shoulder involved because they're stronger, bigger structures that can help offload the wrist so that you can game for longer sessions with less pain. And make sure you get your forearm on the table, again, to set yourself up so that you use the arm and not just the wrist when you're gaming. That's all I have for this video. If it helped you out, make sure to subscribe, give me a like, and comment down the video. If you have any other issues that you have, you can comment those as well. I can try to help you out on those. So again, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.